Welcome back to another episode of Sustainability in the Sea. I really missed you guys. I'm here with my friend Oceans Warrior, aka Mark Haver. He's going to be our first guest of 2025, and I'm really excited for this conversation because low-key Mark is like the most qualified person I know, and we are going to talk about some very important discussions, including how ocean advocates are going to organize and be effective under the Trump administration in the US. I know not all of our listeners are from the US, but it's a very important conversation to have because if you have a conservative or not environmentally minded government, you need to know how your strategy is going to shift. But before we get into that, I do just want to say I hope everyone had a beautiful New Year's. Me and Alex were on the mainland with my family and spending such good quality time. Then I came back and got hit with the festive flu, got rocked for 8 days, and then Mark arrived and has been staying with us, and we've been enjoying Hawaii. But my only main update for you guys is that the episodes for Sustainability in the Sea are going to be a little more intermittent in 2025. We have a lot of big projects and initiatives that require our attention, and so I don't know if we're going to be able to be providing episodes every other week this year, unfortunately, but please tune back in whenever we do drop an episode. You need to follow so that you get the notification wherever you listen to podcasts. And then my last update is that we created these Sustainability in the Sea shirts. We put this design on a hat, and you can now purchase it we are just using TikTok Shop instead of Shopify. So if you want one of those, you can go to the FutureSwell TikTok and purchase on there, and we'll be sending it from our house with a little sticker and everything. So thank you for supporting us, and I think let's get into the episode. Welcome back to Sustainability in the Sea. Hi, Mark.
Hey!
How's it going?
I'm good. I'm just happy to be here. It has been so nice being back in Hawaii, being back in Oahu, and spending it with you and Alex. My heart.
Literally. Mark is really mostly bonded with Riley, which has been a peak.
Yeah, I hope you guys can see her down here.
Yeah, she's part of the episode, obviously. So you said you're back. What was your first time in Hawaii, and what brought you there originally?
Yeah, so the summer of 2019, I spent about 10 weeks in Waikiki, and I was doing a scholarship program called the Hauling Scholarship. So if you are in college, getting your bachelor degree, and you're a second year, look for this program, the Hauling's Scholarship, because it gives you 2 years of financial support, and it places you in a NOAA office wherever there may be one.
This is an insane opportunity. Hauling scholars are like, it's such a pathway to learn about yourself, but also if you do know you want to go to NOAA, it's a great way to dip your toes in.
Totally. It provides great financial support as well, and you even get paid during the internship. And they'll place you, so they have this whole database. And when I was interested in selecting an internship, I was studying marine biology, going to school, Florida Southern College, go Mocs, in Florida, and I knew that I wanted to be by the ocean.
Yeah.
So when you tell me you can go anywhere there's a NOAA office, I said, continental US, peace out, goodbye. So I was fortunate to find this open posting with Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. A lot of people know about the Hawaiian Islands that they can see on a map. But there's this whole extinct volcano chain that goes northwest of the main Hawaiian Islands that we'll see on the map. And that's all one giant marine protected area.
Yeah.
So I was basically responsible for creating a communications plan to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Papahanaumokuakea. And while I was there, I was also doing a conservation paper about sea level rise and how that would affect endangered species living in Papahanaumokuakea, and translocation, basically moving them from one island to the other as a potentially effective conservation tool.
Honestly, Was that your first project into ocean conservation communications?
No, actually, because 2 summers previous was my first internship with NOAA.
Okay.
And I was working in their Office of Protected Resources, and there I was spending a lot of time doing things for a Freedom of Information Act request. FOIAs, yeah. And I was helping them migrate everything from their old website to their new website. I was supporting them with their Species in the Spotlight program. I was doing some like fisheries title stuff.
Cool.
So it was just kind of like, what are the really time-consuming things that we don't want full-time office employees working on?
Yeah.
Intern. But there were communications elements of that, so it was really cool.
Well, before we get into talking about the political landscape and what that means for all of our shared missions, I do want to just dedicate some time to your path, which we've already started discussing a little bit about, because for context, I've known of Mark for far longer than I've known Mark. So Mark is truly has experience in policy, in the international space, in the federal space, and he also works to support the North American youth leaders within the Sustainable Ocean Alliance Network, which you all know that I am in the SOA network as well. So you mentioned you studied marine biology in Florida, and during that time you were just getting a foundation, but what were some like key memories or pivot points where you kind of learned about how you wanted to show up in the space in your undergrad? Because a lot of listeners are actually in getting their degrees right now, and they're taking the opportunities that are just really available to them in their colleges. And so what were those opportunities for you, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I always knew, basically from when I was a little kid, that I wanted to do something with animals. And then as I learned about the extinction crisis, climate change, those were motivators for me in terms of understanding how I wanted to apply my knowledge and where I wanted to be working professionally. And when I was in college, we're taking all these different types of classes, right? Some of them are very scientific and include things like labs.
OChem nearly killed me.
I was like, no thank you, no OChem for me, I'll pass.
Avoid it if you can.
Yeah.
Unless you want to be a biochemist, then you need that. But
if you want to do the science, like, take OChem. I didn't want to do the science. I appreciate science, I love learning about science, but my least favorite classes were the ones where I had to go to the lab and try and figure out all these titrations and concentrations and stuff. To me, I just felt like we kind of know what these big problems are already. Of course, more science is valuable and necessary, but I felt so impatient, so I was wanting to dedicate myself to fixing those problems, which requires all different types of skills: communications, policy advocacy, interpersonal, like community organizing, definitely. And I knew that I was also really interested in international relations, domestic politics, so I kind of created my own program, basically, where I got to study the intersection of the environment, policy, and communications.
Was that like a create your own major opportunity at your school, or you were like, no, I'm just going to take like the closest possible major to what I want to do and then just choose classes intentionally?
Yeah, I actually like quadruple majored.
What?
Yeah, so
I've never met anyone who's done that.
I was smarter than I looked.
What were your majors?
I did environmental studies, marine biology, political science, and political communication.
Oh my god, that sounds like not a lot of time to party in college.
Those.
I wish I took more policy classes in undergrad because it was so intimidating. I took some in grad school, but it was just, I was like, wait, what's going on? I just got kind of thrown into the deep end. So you knew policy was for you.
Yeah, and I mean, the beautiful thing about, I know for many listeners, like, this is not possible at your school. My school allowed me to come in with college credits from high school, and allowed me to over-enroll, and allowed my credits that I was taking in one track to double dip and count for another track. Yeah. And I know that sometimes that's more limited, so everything worked out for me to be able to do that.
And I did want to ask, you know, me and you were both on full ride academic scholarships, so we didn't have to pay for tuition. How did that opportunity come to you as a senior in high school or junior?
Oh my God.
Because that's like it's such a limiting factor for people.
100%. 100%. For me, I was very academically driven in high school and in college and previous to then. And I was shooting for Ivy League schools or Ivy adjacent schools when I was applying.
Yeah.
But even though I was valedictorian, I didn't get accepted by a single one of my top schools. And so I was left with these schools that were offering me some academic scholarships, but weren't necessarily the places that had the program that I wanted, had the faculty that I wanted, were in the location that I wanted.
But they were free.
But yeah, or, you know, a lot more discounted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just turns out Florida Southern was the best scholarship that I was offered.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for my college experience. FSC, I love you. It was the best. I loved it so much. And I would say, for me, choosing a school that gave me no student loans, no student debt, has enabled me to take a lot more risks than other people who are burdened with having to settle those financial worries.
Right.
Because I don't have debt, I feel like maybe other decisions can put me in debt, but since I don't have to worry about that immediately, it allows me to be able to work my own path more slowly and take those chances, like I said.
And I feel like I found out about my scholarship from my advisor, and so I think for listeners, you know, like there's resources like Scholarship Universe where you can look up scholarships, but also like your school advisor might also have opportunities for you. So check that out. And then when you were graduated and entering the workforce, I know you had your stint here with Papahanamo Kuakea, but what type of policy experience did you get and how did those opportunities come to you?
I didn't really get much policy experience in college.
You're taking classes mainly.
I was taking classes, I was working on the side, I was doing these summer internships, and a lot of them were kind of, you know, more science or maybe even communications focused.
Yeah.
But I graduated at the worst time. I graduated into the job market May 2020.
R.I.P.
Yeah, literally the worst.
Yikes.
So it was the COVID era, and I don't think anybody was going to hire someone with an environmental studies degree in May 2020. Or if they were, there were no jobs. People were getting laid off. Like, the struggle was all too real. So luckily, I had been very involved politically throughout my college engagement. I had been working already at that point for 2 years with the Florida Democratic Party as someone that was doing voter registration on campuses and in the community.
Cool.
And so if there were no jobs in environmental studies in 2020, there were surely jobs in politics. And I recognized the potential, if Biden was to win and come into office, the potential to get a job in his administration, more climate and environmental jobs would be created anyway.
Yeah.
And kind of just having hope from there that the situation with the pandemic and professionally would improve. So yeah, I worked politically, and I was really interested in the environment and policy nexus. I think it's really important that we keep the environment as a priority when we're voting, when we're thinking about politics, when we're thinking about how politics influence the environment and vice versa.
Yeah.
And after Biden won, I ended up moving up to DC for some job opportunities.
Was that, did you find that there were other early career environmentally minded folks in the community that you were building when you first moved to DC? Because that must have been so intimidating to be like, I'm a college grad from Florida, I'm passionate about policy, and now you're where everything is happening.
Yeah.
Did you have any lessons learned from that chapter of adjustment?
Totally.
Yeah.
That was honestly a pretty difficult period. I'm from Maryland originally, so 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., in a town known as Ellicott City. And if you actually look up Ellicott City, Maryland, you'll find that the town has been in the news for climate-related flooding. So it's very interesting as well to know how much climate change has affected my life and the lives and livelihoods of those in my community.
Yeah.
But that enabled me to live at home before I got an actual job in Washington, D.C.
Great.
And when I was applying for jobs, that was horrible, okay? Another moment where I'm graduating top of my class and not getting one single offer.
Yeah.
I applied for 150, 200, 250, 300 jobs. I got a couple interviews, never got a full-time job offer. Never.
It is honestly the hardest thing to get the first job.
And I was wondering, I was like, what more could I have done?
Right.
You know? I did internships every summer.
You're a Holling Scholar, you were valedictorian, you had an academic scholarship, you're in the place where the jobs are. There's a new environmentally minded administration.
Yeah.
What's the problem here?
I was trying. So when I moved to DC, it took me 6 months to go from living in Maryland at home to getting an apartment in Washington, DC.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so thankful for my experience with ESP Advisors, who was the first company that who hired me, you know?
First job.
My first, well, not my first job.
Or first, right.
Yeah, my
first
first
post-grad career.
Yeah.
Ocean climate policy.
Yeah, working on what I wanted to do. And it was difficult because it was the pandemic, right? So a lot of the social environments that would have normally fostered friendships with people in your field, there weren't.
They were all paused.
They were all paused. And I'm really thankful for organizations like Sustainable Ocean Alliance because they've done a really great job at building community of passionate young people who want to take ocean action all over the world. And it was through initiatives like the Youth Policy Advisory Council, which I founded with SOA, that allowed me to connect with that community of impassioned individuals for the ocean. And in DC, I was just connecting with people who I'd known from growing up near the area, or I'm thankful for like the LGBT community. That was a huge outlet for me when I moved to DC. So.
What about the policy landscape? For folks that are listening, you know, I feel like FutureSwell really represents the applied approach to ocean conservation, kind of what we're talking about. And policy can be really intimidating to ocean conservationists that say have an undergrad degree in marine science or marine biology, and they're like, I really want to participate in policy, but I don't know like what that even looks like, or I didn't major in a policy focused major. What would you have to say to them advice wise on getting involved in that level, considering not everyone can move to DC and engage in that way, but you manage this beautiful global network of youth leaders through Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which has a strong policy nexus, and what kind of lessons do you provide them to kind of empower them to create change policy-wise?
Yeah, and honestly, there's a ton of stuff that you can do.
Yeah.
There's truly so many different levels at which you can attack policy. So if you're really passionate about banning styrofoam, for example.
We did that here.
Yeah, love it, love it, gang gang. If you're passionate about banning styrofoam, there's a number of ways that you can go about this. If you're passionate about reducing emissions in your community or reducing global emissions, there are a number of ways that you can go about that. So I think if you're thinking about policy, you just have to kind of figure out what is the issue that you want to mobilize on. Mm-hmm. And what's really important is finding a group that will mobilize with you, finding a community that cares about the same thing, and building relationships with them, not just out of work, but also on a social, personal relationship type of way, okay?
And a lot of these coalitions might already exist, and you just
Totally.
got to plug into them. But you have to find them. And that's the harder part.
Yeah, and you can create your own as well. Like, if there isn't a coalition that is working in Hawaii on banning styrofoam, there is. But if there wasn't, then being able to create that community is important. And then identifying the level at which you'd like to work is crucial, right? Yeah. Let's say we're in Kailua right now, so if we see that there's a styrofoam problem in Kailua, then we need to figure out Do I talk to the mayor? Do I talk to the city council? Who are the targets that I need that will be the decision makers on whether or not plastic is regulated?
We do have an episode, a sustainability in sea episode, where we interviewed Duray Shin. She got styrofoam banned or polystyrene banned across UH Manoa campus as a student. So that's another thing is it's like, okay, say you live in an area that doesn't necessarily have the political government climate to be passing something as quote bold, that's not bold at all, but like bold as this, you can mobilize at your school or mobilize at a sub-community level. And I think that also gets a lot of excitement from when you get to work with your peers and then you have a win under you. So yeah.
Totally. It's also legitimizing, right? Because if you're going to be working at a federal level and you're some random person that's working on their own, then they're going to be like, what? Like, who this?
Like, what have you done? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if I could go back, I wish I knew that, like, to get some smaller wins under the belt, because now I'm just like shooting for the moon, and I'm kind of like, you learn so much from those smaller wins, even if they don't end up being a win.
But also, there's nothing wrong with shooting for the moon either. One of the first initiatives that I led myself, because I always felt intimidated by leadership. Not necessarily in terms of being able to like manage a team or an on-campus student-led organization, but in being able to devise a project of my own. I'd rather just plug into something existing. I don't want to create something new. But I ended up doing that, and I ended up creating the Global Blue New Deal, which was this youth-led, crowdsourced ocean and climate policy framework.
Was that with Sustainable Ocean Alliance?
Yeah. So that was like one of the main projects under the inaugural Youth Policy Advisory Council.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that was obviously a huge undertaking, right? How do I create this landmark document that's synthesizing the perspectives, opinions, and policy demands of young people from all over the world?
All over the world. And
then presenting that on behalf of youth as stakeholders in the ocean community.
I know that, oh my god, obsessed with her. Dr. Ayana Elizabeth also was a huge leader on the Blue New Deal. Was there an opportunity to collaborate in those ways with some of these other stakeholders when you were creating it?
Actually, no. That was really interesting because I was making my global Blue New Deal based off of the Green New Deal that came from AOC and Ed Markey here in the US. And they didn't include the ocean very much. They had the ocean included twice. And I was like,
classic.
Guys, come on. So instead of me creating this document that probably no one would read, I wanted to go to the community of young people that were trying to do something about what's happening to the ocean and synthesize their perspectives.
Cool.
That happened separately from when Dr. Johnson was working on the Blue New Deal as part of the policy platform that Elizabeth Warren was pushing when she was running for president. That really was an incredible initiative that she led. We haven't had the opportunity to collaborate on that, especially also because with a global Blue New Deal, we didn't want it to be tied to something with US politics, right? But it's great to see all these different moments to support ocean action from all different levels.
Yeah. So we've talked this week about how so much, or most of your postgraduate career has been during the Biden administration, which has had such an influx of funding to climate solutions. It has such deep empowerment of youth leaders. God, they're so youth forward. It's beautiful to see. And now we're entering this phase, literally in just a few days, where we are entering a second Trump administration. And for those listening, I was a graduate student when Trump was elected initially, and I watched our project get defunded because I was working with NOAA as a graduate student, and I had to go find another master's project, which was fun. But that was just one of the personal impacts of that administration. The environmental rollbacks that took place, I had such of a lesser policy understanding, and it's going to be very eye-opening to observe it now as someone who has engaged further in policy. And so when we talk about being effective these next 4 years, because we're running out of time, we've got so many solutions at our hands, and we have so many people who are passionate about making change. Where do you think our energy should be going? And I know that local is such a key part of this. But what else comes to mind? Because you work a lot internationally as well.
Yeah, so, and speaking first about international and also in keeping timelines in mind with respect to environmental campaigning, I think it's really important that we take a step back and understand just how crucial this 5-year period is between 2025 and 2030.
Yeah.
With respect to climate science, a lot of these targets that we've created for emissions reduction, for financing, for all different levels of climate action were based on 2030. Okay? For example, our Paris climate goals are so that we can reduce carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. Okay, that's in 5 years.
Yeah.
There are different tipping points that scientists hypothesize will be reached if we do not take this critical action by 2030. Globally. So, I don't want to stoke anybody's climate anxiety, but it's important that we understand that this is a crunch time for climate action, and we're given a really difficult hand to deal with, okay? I always, in my work, think it's important to understand what actually is going on with climate, who's contributing the most, right? I think it's really important to look at the climate crisis like a numbers game. Because if you're focusing on the smallest part of the pie with the majority of your energy, then
It's not efficient.
yeah, maybe priorities need to shift. And I think that we as a community can do better about educating ourselves and our community about what is the most rapid and feasible ways to decarbonize over the next 5 years. And it's important for us to recognize who are these contributors, right? So the top 5 emitters in the world are China, the US, Russia, India, and the EU, okay? Influencing policy in China, Russia, and India is really difficult,
Right.
especially for the audience of this podcast, I would imagine, and generally for US international civil society audiences. Okay, they gonna do what they gonna do, for the most part. That leaves us with the EU, and that leaves us with the US. The EU is decarbonizing. Their annual emissions are decreasing, and they've been on a decreasing trend. Is it as much as we need? No. Is it
They're
as fast
doing
as we
it.
need? No. But what we can do to advance more rapid decarbonization in the EU is great, and it's great to see that they're one of the few groups of countries that's actually reducing their annual carbon footprint.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with who? The US. Okay?
Us.
The US produces more oil than any country in the world. Not Saudi Arabia, not Iran, no. The US is the world's largest oil producer, so heads up.
That's us.
And now, this year, and really just a couple weeks, Trump is going to be president for the next 4 years.
Who took so much money from the fossil fuel industry to get him elected in
Totally.
exchange for environmental rollbacks.
This man wants to expand oil and gas drilling, which
Rapidly.
would just increase the amount of emissions that we're putting out, worsening climate change. He wants to get rid of climate change programs, and remember, he pulled us out of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
So we have a 4-year presidential term over a 5-year period when we need to be decarbonizing. That makes it really, really challenging. And because of this, it's really important that we understand, given these challenging conditions, where do we focus? And I think this gets back to the question you were originally asking. I think that there are a couple ways that we can look at this. I think first of all, we have to recognize jurisdictions. Federal is going to be defense. You're always going to be on defense working with federal climate and environmental policy over the next 4 years for the most part.
We need to stop rollbacks. So we need to
Right.
maintain the conservation measures and progress what we've made and make sure that they don't get undone is
Yeah.
what that means.
I think a lot of nonprofits in this space, think tanks as well, have gone through this before with the first Trump presidency, previous conservative administrations. So
They've got strategies.
They have strategies. Yeah, exactly. It's nothing new.
Big players know what to expect.
Right. But I think that there are two areas where we need to be focusing more. And I think one of them is on corporate climate action.
Mm.
And I think that there are all different ways that you can support corporate climate action. One of them is larger divest movements, ensuring that we, the people, are putting pressure on banks from getting rid of their investments into the fossil fuel economy.
Chase Bank is the largest investor in the fossil fuel industry. So if you have a Chase Bank account, you can divest and close those accounts and move it over to a less impactful bank or credit union.
Yeah, there's even a bank called Bank for Climate.
Oh, cool.
They're really great, so check them out.
Yeah. There's a tool called bankforgood.com, and
Yeah.
it allows you to type in like who you have, and it'll give you suggestions of where to go. It's the best tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. And then the other one of them is corporate climate action in terms of corporations leading decarbonization activity. So let's think offshore wind industry, the shipping industry with their decarbonization initiatives, renewable energy at large,
Yeah.
green infrastructure, alternative fuels.
Nature-based solutions.
Right. What we can do to scale up the actions led by companies to decarbonize, probably going to be one of the most fruitful ways to advance decarbonization and climate action over the next 4 years.
And that's probably through us as consumers.
Yes, it's as us as consumers and as working professionals.
Yeah, if working within the corporate sector.
Totally.
Yeah, and that requires, being vocal. Yes, to knowing where you're putting your money and supporting the companies that embody the values that you want to see that are climate progressive, but also being vocal to the businesses and companies that you do really like and maybe don't want to let go of as a consumer, because they simply just don't know what the priorities are of their consumers unless it is being shared to them.
Yeah. Okay, so we have corporate climate action. I would say that there are two other main fields where I believe that we as the climate and youth climate movement really need to be focusing our attention. One of them would be at the state level then, right? I mean, makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of states have different emissions depending on the state. Texas, New York, California. California is doing a pretty good job, but especially mobilizing more climate action in states that have larger climate footprints. I mean, if we're going to look at it like a numbers game, that would just make sense, right? So being able to focus on state-led action is important.
And then at the city and county level too.
Especially at the city and county level. Because listen, there's always this thing called an implementation gap, right?
Yeah.
If I'm working at the UN, and the UN wants to institute change, the UN is going to mandate something that then national governments have to interpret and implement. Who's going to be implementing them? The state's going to be involved. Some
the
random
county.
organization is going to be involved. An executive agency is going to be involved. The local stakeholders are like in a trickle-down type of system.
Yeah.
The people who probably receive the least, right?
Yeah.
So how does the intent for what started at the top actually implement action on the ground? That's the implementation gap. You lose a piece of impact along that journey.
And we found here that with the single-use plastic ban, Bill 40, that actually was attempted at the state level multiple times, and it was also talked about in the Duray episode. And then it wasn't successful, and it was like year after year after year, and they'd had all these engaged young people and stakeholders, and they were going to graduate, and everyone was nervous, and they pivoted to the county level and had a lot of success that way. And so that's also a strategy, is if you're too high up, it can be harder to pass, and you can go lower.
Totally. And I also think the final category for where we should be focusing our priorities is civil disobedience. And what do I mean by this? If we look at some of the most successful social movements in history, women's suffrage, MLK, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela counter-apartheid, there were dramatic actions that people took to disrupt systems and processes in the way that they functioned. There were boycotts, there were marches, there were all different types of acts that we're counter to the status quo. What does help is understanding how do we disrupt the fossil fuel economy from moving forward in the way that continues to destroy our planet.
Yeah, how do we disrupt supply chains? Unions are a huge aspect to this. There's different approaches to it, and I'm a big believer in that all approaches are needed, because you saw that with Martin Luther King, the more disruptive strategies employed by Malcolm X helped Martin Luther King be centered and his thoughts be uplifted, and then he was able to lead. So there's like a huge spectrum of approaches. I would say a good example in the climate movement right now is climate defiance. They focus on extremely disruptive approaches to accountability with government leaders, and that, I would say, fringe approach helps more moderate civil disobedient approaches like marches, like peaceful protests, also gets centered as effective. So
Totally.
that's a huge element I'm really happy you emphasized.
So how do we disrupt extractive activity, right? I think that's a question for where we can focus direct action.
In Australia, they had a peaceful surfer paddle out that stopped shipping of oil barges to protest the fossil fuel industry. Just like literally thousands of surfers, like they couldn't move the barge, and it ended up being pretty effective. So things like that, which require skills of community organizers and interpersonal skills and relationship building, and then also getting this out there through storytelling and media and content, and making sure that other people can learn from those lessons that, like, I observed on my phone, those examples, Yeah.
Totally. I think it's really important that people recognize that being an activist does not necessarily mean that you're this radical that's out here perceived as the woke left.
Yeah.
My friend Daniel, he always says everyone is an activist, okay? Why do we as environmentalists get labeled as an activist when we know that those oil and gas CEOs are activists, just in a different way, in a way that's not labeled with this negative connotation, because these activists are just,
so unruly.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's an activist, and you have to recognize that some people get the white-collar privilege of being able to label it differently. They get to surpass some of these judicial fines and things like that because of their wealth and because they've been able to fix the system in a way that benefits them and continues to screw us over. So I think it's really important that we recognize that it really is an issue that has so many different types of solutions that can be applied.
Yeah, and so many people that we need to lead on those solutions. In our previous episode, we interviewed Chad Nelson, who runs Surfrider, and he talked about what an ocean campaign needs, and he talked about how most of the power levers that we have are rooted in people power, and simply organizing hundreds of people requires a lot of work and a lot of individuals to show up and lead and guide and provide structure and organize, and those skills are so important.
100%. And this is a tough time. I'm sure we've emphasized that enough throughout this, and just how challenging the conditions are going to be, right? But community has always been important. It's always been something that can manage burnout, That's why I'm thankful I'm here,
we're rejuvenated.
We're having a great time, So being able to center your work around community, bringing people together and joining hand in hand in this fight is something that's probably the most important over the next 4 or 5 years, actually.
Yeah, know who your people are.
Yeah, exactly. Friendship sustains long-term impact and initiatives.
For real.
It's true.
I'm at this point now where I'm just like, I never thought I'd get here. I always saw people above me who had this, and it's like, I just know which of my friends are specialized because I care so deeply about them. And so if I have a question, I know who to ask. If I have a question about international and federal policy, I'm going to call Mark. This is, and all that is centered around joy and relationship building. I don't know. It's so, I wouldn't say it's cliche, but it's definitely true.
I know it feels like rainbows and unicorns, friendship, this coalition.
But it is.
I'm sorry though, a lot of the coalitions that I've seen that have not spent the time fostering those relationships flop. They flop. So truly, when I say like being able to create a leadership team in a community around the work that you're doing,
It's like a gift.
It's a vital part. Okay, it's not like frou la la. Like
Yes.
let's get to work.
Are you
No,
the
no, no.
social extrovert of your friend group? Because I'm sorry, but that is the gift skill set that we need. So, okay, we finish every single episode with the same question.
Okay.
And the question is, if you could write a message on a billboard sign that all of the most powerful leaders in the entire world would have to see, what would it say or look like, or what would be on there?
I think it would just say resign. They have failed us.
Fresh start. We need a fresh start.
We need a fresh start. You know what? I'm serious, okay?
Resign.
Resign. These mofos have been effing it up, okay? We're really not doing well, okay?
Yeah,
and there's so much
on all fronts.
We're losing on so many fronts. And the fact of the matter is that we as young people are going to be feeling the impacts of the decisions that they make today the longest. Logically.
Yeah.
Right? Okay? Then why is my future being governed in a battle between who should be president of the United States? One old white man with dementia or another old white man with dementia? Are you joking? Are you joking?
They're literally not joking.
No. So here's the thing. This isn't just unique to the US either. I think that we as young people need to step into our own power. Okay? I think we need to be comfortable assuming that really are the people that are elected to represent us doing that great of a job, actually representing our interests. You want a climate candidate? You won't have one unless you are one. So step into your own power. Try and take the power that rightfully belongs to you in a democratic system anyway. And you know what? Build that coalition around that vision that you have for a better tomorrow.
Thanks for coming on Sustainability in the Sea.
I'm so, again, thankful to have this space with you. Everything that Chris has said about me is a lie.
It's
I've
not.
been here representing the oil and gas industry this whole time.
He's a snake. All right, see you guys next time.
Bye.